So now that we've gone through all the settings that we need to figure out for our test, we're going to talk about how to make sure that everything's going to run smooth for you on test day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to preview your test and then take a look at your results after the students have taken the test. So I'm going to click this to enable and then save. And then to make sure that I know that if you're like me and you're worried about how things are going to go, especially when you're using a new instructional technology in your classroom, and especially when it has to do with your summative assessments, I click preview here to make sure that everything's going to go smoothly. So this screen shows you what your screen will look like if you were a student in the class taking the test. And you're going to click Start New Attempt. Now, again, we only have one question in our sample test. So I'm going to just answer it, and then I'm going to hit review. Again, since we hit that review questions, you'll hit review and then submit, and the students are able to see which questions they answered, which ones they didn't. It doesn't tell you which answer were right and wrong because we're in preview mode. But it does tell you that everything's working properly in the Schoology test. So once you're satisfied that everything is working properly, you can go back to settings. This pops up. Don't worry about it. This just reminds students that if they were to ever try to leave your testing page and go Google something like an answer, the changes that they make in the test won't be saved. It'll actually pop up, and I'll show you how to determine if students were not academically honest on your test, because it shows you a different time that the students took the test than everybody else. So go back to settings, and again, make sure you disable your test so students can't take the test. Remember, they can still see it in your resources if you made it visible. So we're going to disable it so that even if they click on it, they won't be able to take the test. So I'm going to go to one of my actual tests to talk to you about results and things you need to look for and things you can talk to your PLC about as far as data is concerned. So this is what a results page looks like in Schoology. As you can see, over here you have your student names. Over here it talks about how many times the student attempted it and how many times they submitted it. And then one thing that I have found that helps me determine if students were doing something they weren't supposed to be doing is when I look at this latest attempt column here. So typically speaking, most of these times should be pretty close to each other. So if I were to see one, so most of these are like 7:35, between 7:35 and 7:45. If I saw this one, where a student is taking the test about 40 minutes after everybody else has started the test, that's going to be a red flag for me that the student cheated. Now, I know the student actually showed up late to class that day, but that's a big red flag that you can actually go through while the students are taking the test, and it'll show you when their latest attempt was to tell you if a student was cheating or not. Another thing is, sometimes in my class, I give extra credit that I can add to their final grades. You can change, although these come right from the test, and you don't actually have to do anything like adding these to your grade book or running them through a Scantron or anything like that. It grades it for you. You can actually change this right here if you'd like to. So if I want to change this from 99 or to a 99, I can do that. If I click something and I didn't mean to click it, it's very easy to undo what you just did and hit clear override. If you do decide to change anyone's final score on a test, make sure you go down here and click Save Changes. I'm not going to do that because that'll change everyone's final exam grade, and that would be bad. But you are able to do that. Now, if you're looking at your tests and you're realizing that a lot of students got or didn't do as well as you'd hoped, what you can do is, so let's say for Timon, I noticed that he didn't do as well as he usually does on his test. I can click View Attempts. And if I want to talk to Timon about why he got a few questions wrong, I can go through here and determine what section of the test he didn't do well on, which specific questions he didn't do well on, and we can actually have a conference together after the test is over to determine how he can do better on the next exam. If you're wanting to look at more of a class data, if you're wanting to look at more of whole class data, what you can do is look at results by question. So what this tells you is how students did on each particular question. Now, the reason I feel like this is really helpful, especially on test day, is because it tells me if there's something on the test that I think I might have put in incorrectly, that I might have keyed incorrectly, excuse me. So what you're looking for here is the average. Okay, so this says that 95% of my students got this correct. As long as every question's out of 1 point, this will tell you the percentage of your students that got it correct. Now, as I move down here, okay, I see that only 26% of my students got this question correct on their final. I can then go to view responses. Okay, and this goes through each student in the section and it will tell me what they picked. Now, if I notice that every student picked was America's first legislature, I can either say that that's supposed to be the right answer and that I keyed this incorrectly, or I can see where a misconception was for my students and go back the next day and talk about that in class. And I think that's a very helpful feature in Schoology that you can look at with the students together in class. However, the thing that I like to look at while students are taking the test on test day is I like to look at what the entire class average is so that I can determine if students were successful or not as a whole on test day. The way you are able to do that is by view stats. I'm going to wait for this to populate. Okay. There will be a graph right here. Because this class is inactive, it won't show me the graph right now, but it'll give you like a bell curve over here to determine how many of your students did well, how many of them did poorly, and things like that. The thing that I like to look at more than the graph is up here. I like to look at the range, okay, and I like to look at the average and the median. I like to look at the median more than the average because, as you know from stats class, it gets rid of your outliers, your students that did really well, your students that did really poorly, and tells me how well students did overall in the exam. But I feel like this is a very helpful tool to tell me if students were successful on this or not right off the bat, and then I can go back and look at the questions question by question to determine if there was a spot in the unit where students got really confused that we can go back and remediate. That is about it for the things we're going to get into about the Schoology exams. Right now, I'd like you to go back and to the questions part, if you decided to skip that part earlier, and play around with it a little bit, do a little self-discovery, talk to your neighbors about things they've seen other people do as far as Schoology exams are concerned. Feel free to call me over if there's something that you're looking at that you're confused about. In a few minutes, we're going to come back together as an entire group, and we're going to talk about the big post-it notes that you guys worked on together as a class, and talk about some troubleshooting tips that can save you a lot of time within Schoology in general.